Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Price Formation Enhancements Scarcity Pricing meeting. Today's call, we have a continuation of the topic from November 10th, 2025. Today, we'll go over some few housekeeping reminders as well. My name is Brenda Marquez. On behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group, we welcome you to today's meeting. This call is being recorded for informational and communities purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is also structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. We also encourage comments to be professional and respectful of all times. And if you have any questions, please refrain from repeating anything that has been previously said in order for us to manage our time effectively. We're also aware we have another stakeholder meeting happening right now. So we also invite stakeholders that this call is recorded and will be posted shortly within the price formation enhancements page. So you'll be able to see it. But we'll hopefully have enough everyone to join us when we have our policy leads speak on the topics. To ask a question, you'll open the participant chat window on the bottom right of your screen. You'll use the raise hand icon to ask a question. And those who are dialed in only to the audio only, you'll use *3 to ask a question. And remember, for both options, if you even submit a question in the chat, please provide the affiliation and your full name so we know who's speaking. And at any time you have any questions, send them over to our panelists. Also myself, I can also help with any questions. And also my event producer today is Ryan. He'll be helping us with any technical issues that we may endure for the questions here. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a recap, or we're going to continue on the continuation of the scarcity pricing topic from November 10th. A few slides starting this presentation are from the previous presentation, so you'll be able to see that. But James will guide us on the next slides that he'll be discussing, as well opportunity for asking questions. So I'll go ahead and change it to the slide that we needed to, and then my event producer here will help run the slides, and then James and Danny Johnson are here from the Policy Development, Market Design, and Policy Development team, so they're here just to support for this topic. Just quick audio check on James before we get started.
I'm here.
Awesome, hear you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, can we move forward? Let me see. One more slide. One more slide. There we go. Okay. So the plan for today's discussion is to continue the discussion we had on November 10th. We did not get through the full slide. So mostly this presentation today is just a continuation of the slides from last Monday. And I provided just some recap slides, two additional recap slides, and then one sort of concluding slide to the deck. And I believe that revised deck has been posted under the same group in the PFE webpage as the November 10th call. So they look, so folks know it's, more or less discussing the same topic, just on two different times. So from November 10th, the purpose of the call on November 10th was to first explain that the ISO is planning to resume discussion on comprehensive scarcity pricing design, in part reacting to the some stakeholder feedback from the straw proposal, and plans to continue with the working group setting, having these discussions with the scarcity pricing. And then concurrently, in a parallel track, the policy that was considered in the August 2025 straw proposal would continue to make progress on a parallel track, and we would continue to develop the policy for the BA level market power mitigation topic. And for now, at least, the two proposals that were present in that straw proposal as relating to scarcity pricing, it's possible that what culminates from this side of the discussion on comprehensive scarcity pricing design could either make the require changes, eventual changes to those two proposals, or render them, more or less useless. So we'll sort of keep that in the backs of our minds. But we also did hear some feedback in the previous session that, at least for some stakeholders, they feel like, there's the potential that if the CAISO could implement those nearer term, scarcity pricing changes as it considers, longer term changes under this track of the initiative, that would still be beneficial. And that's something that we plan to ask stakeholders about in their comments. And so we do plan to continue to make progress on those policies under that proposal. And insofar as this track leads us to a straw proposal specifically for a comprehensive scarcity pricing design. And we would make progress on these tracks simultaneously with the ultimate goal of taking them for governance decision together at this time when those processes are complete. So we were lucky to have 2 stakeholder presentations on the November 10th call. We had one stakeholder presentation from the Joint LSE group, representatives from the California IOUs and CalCCA, NCPA, 6 cities, BAMX. If I'm forgetting anyone, I apologize. In which their feedback was essentially that they support the ISO making incremental improvements in the realm of scarcity pricing, but feel that comprehensive reforms as are being discussed under this series of working groups is not appropriate until other market changes happen, and more of a matter of timing, working out the timing of those initiatives. That there's a lot going on with DAME and EDAM and the like, and so sort of question the timing of these discussions. We had another presentation from WPTF, which sort of had the opposite tone, that they sort of agree with the resume discussion on this topic, and presented some high-level discussion on this supply margin design that we're thinking about during these calls, and that can be implemented rather quickly and apply equitably across all BAAs. Implemented quickly is relevant to the discussion around whether or not the scarcity pricing design would end up sort of attaching itself to a reserve product or not, and the supply margin design that WPTF presented would not do that, and so presumably could be implemented faster without having to redesign a new reserve product. So as part of that, we also discussed the fundamentals of scarcity pricing, the theory, and sort of broke it down into the 4 basic elements that all scarcity pricing designs must have. First is a scarcity metric or trigger, basically some way to measure the amount of available capacity relative to system demand at any given time. So you basically have you basically have a way to measure precisely how scarce you are under what timeframes. The scarcity pricing requires a reliability value, essentially a way to anchor and scale the demand curve for different levels of scarcity. It requires a mechanism to incorporate the demand curve into the price formation of the market. And so it could be through a reserve product and associated demand curve, or potentially through a supply margin approach that is a little bit different. And finally, you need those 3 things, and combined, you need to also achieve with those 3 parameters a sufficient forward-looking price signal that is able to measure scarcity on a forward-looking time frame, so to give market participants and the market optimization itself sufficient time to respond to impending scarcity, and so to either avoid or reduce the severity of any impending shortage event. We discussed in the November 10th session the current market gaps, essentially that the ISO market suite of reserve products as they stand today are insufficient to support footprint-wide scarcity pricing. And that's been a problem statement we've been wrestling with for pretty much this entire PFE working group series. We'll go to the next slide. In the November 10th discussion, we sort of narrowed in on two approaches. There were no recommendations made, but we see at this time these are sort of the two competing options for a comprehensive scarcity pricing design that accomplishes the things we want to accomplish with this design. You have a reserve plus an ORDC, where you essentially implement a new reserve product with the corresponding demand curve and co-optimize this reserve product with energy and lead to scarcity pricing this way. This is the most common way of implementing scarcity pricing across the FERC jurisdictional markets. There's also the supply margin approach, which we discussed, which essentially, instead of implementing a reserve product, you're looking at sort of trading off with energy, and essentially you would put some sort of risk cost into the market's objective function so that anytime you're trading off energy and reserves, it comes at sort of an opportunity cost measured by this risk cost. So as a way of sort of implementing scarcity pricing without having to implement a new reserve product. And we explained in the November 10th session that, mathematically, if you were to assume that the parameters and inputs to these methods were perfectly aligned and you assumed perfect substitutability between energy and reserves, that these two methods are functionally equivalent and would produce the same exact prices, dispatch, and market solution. And of course, that doesn't mean that's just saying there's not as much, there are some differences between the products in terms of their implementability and complexity and certain questions that we need to go over for each of the designs, but at the end of the day, they're really not that much different. And so we wanted to make that point. In the November 10th session, we discussed some key questions, including whether or not the scarcity pricing should apply inside or outside of the market. Inside of the market, referring to that the scarcity price is determined as an output of the market clearing process, where outside of the market referring to a separate process where the market calculates the dispatch and prices under the status quo and then tacks on an additional process that measures the scarcity after the dispatch is already determined and adds on sort of a quote unquote scarcity adder to the LMP that's relevant for settlements. And we argued that having the scarcity pricing design be implemented within the market clearing process would provide some benefits, that it would correct the dispatch. It would allow the market to identify where the scarce regions are and avoid any sort of price inconsistency between the published prices and the dispatch, where generators would have liked to be producing at some amount, but then based on the settled prices, but the market dispatch didn't move them to that quantity. We talked about the time horizon. What is the sort of optimal time horizon for the market to be measuring scarcity at any given time? Recognizing that, under the existing reserve products, like flexible ramping product, that's a common reserve product to the entire market footprint, that the the sort of uncertainty that is being measured in those existing products is pretty limited, and is sort of looking at an interval by interval amount of uncertainty. And we've concluded in the working groups that's just not sufficient amount of look ahead to give a good sense about what energy scarcity is looking like. And so, we have to sort of define, what's the time bound of the scarcity that we are looking at, and provided some trade-offs there. And then in today's session, we just have a couple of slides, but we want to talk about things like what's the geographic scope of the scarcity? Should the scarcity apply over the market footprint? Should it apply to each balancing area separately? Or possibly, should it even apply at the nodal level, sort of like flexible ramping product does? We're going to talk about deliverability. Essentially, what level of deliverability is necessary, essentially? Understanding that, any true measure of reliability value would hope to incorporate some amount of deliverability, because sort of spare capacity that can't be delivered to load has basically no reliability value. And so, but of course, the more deliverability that you test in the market model, the more complicated it becomes. And so, what's the right balance there? And then finally, whether or not the scarcity pricing should apply in the day-ahead market. These questions have all implicated the real-time market, but of course, it's a reasonable question to wonder whether or not the market should have a sort of symmetric or similar process in the day-ahead market as is being done in real time. And so we'll talk about some major questions there. Okay, so that should provide a good recap of the November 10th session and what we discussed and what's coming up in the next few slides. I'll pause quickly to see if there's any clarifying questions or feedback before I proceed.
I don't see any questions in the queue. And also, we're working on that transparency viewer for folks who want to see who's logged into this meeting. So we'll get that up shortly, back up again. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here on the slide, we're going to consider the question about what level the scarcity pricing should apply geographically. And similarly, what level of deliverability should be required. They in a sense kind of go hand in hand. And so here we present, three different options at a glance. Of course, this is not a, this is just again, at a glance. It's not possible. We can't possibly illustrate all the possible combinations of these things, but I think these are, at least we see these as sort of the major categories to be thinking about. First is a footprint level scarcity pricing, where you would calculate a margin over the entire footprint, where you're comparing the amount of available capacity over the market footprint to the amount of total footprint demand. And so what this would result in is a sort of single reserve margin across the entire market footprint, all combined into one. This would also mean that prices would rise uniformly everywhere across the market footprint as the margin decreases, because everybody is sort of contributing to the same margin. It would mean that there wouldn't be any transmission or transmission constraints considered or scheduling limits applied. And so, again, it's very uniform. One single price relevant for the entire market footprint in this perspective. And so you're getting the same sort of scarcity price at all locations. Second would be sort of a BA level look at it, where you define, instead of the margin over the entire market footprint, you imply the margin over a balancing area, each participating balancing area in the real-time market, for example, where you would calculate the BAAs capacity relative to its BA demand at any given time. So you would have separate margins for each BA. You could have some BAs that are scarce, some BAs that are not. It would, this option may be able to respect the transfer limits between BAs. And so you have, scheduling limits enforced where you're able to, in a sense, transfer energy and other commodities to each other with the scarcity price in mind, so that, if one BA is scarce and its neighbor is not, that the market dispatch can recognize that, the non-scarce BA should export power to the scarce BA. And but this option may ignore internal BA transmission constraints. So the margin is applied broadly. The scarcity price would be uniform within the balancing area because the margin is, all resources contribute to the margin, all loads contribute to the margin equally. And so you would sort of have a uniform scarcity price for the entire balancing area. So while that's true, you would have different scarcity prices across BAs. So at least you would be able to know which BAs are scarce, and therefore their scarcity prices will represent higher urgency, and the market would presumably be able to facilitate transfers to the scarce BAs in that way. And then finally, you get down to sort of a nodal style or FRP style option where, if you'll recall, the FRP requirements are actually calculated on a balancing area level, but then there's a process to distribute the requirement to individual nodes on the system, in the footprint, in the BA. And so you could imagine a similar thing where you would start with some sort of BA level requirement or margin, and you would take this margin and distribute it to nodes within the BA, and procure the scarcity prices essentially nodally, respecting all network and transfer constraints, or at least the ones that are similarly enforced in the existing deployment scenarios. So you could get, out of this option, you could get nodal prices for scarcity across the footprint. So not only are you getting sort of a picture of the balancing area level scarcity, but you may also have pockets within the balancing area that are particularly scarce or constrained, with which you might be able to have differentiated pricing based on scarcity in these types of regions. And so so let me peek at my next slide before I take a question. I think, can we go to slide 24? I'm going to present slide 24, and then I'll stop for questions on slide 23 and 24 together. So, at a very high level, obviously, the more granular locationally the scarcity pricing can apply, the more accurate, but of course it's more complicated. And so, a balance is needed there. BA level scarcity pricing can still should at least be able to direct market transfers to the scarce region, and has the benefit of at least aligning who is paying the scarcity price with who is short. And then, from our perspective, we find the footprint level scarcity pricing to be quite problematic for a few reasons listed here. First, with a uniform footprint adder, every BA is going to pay more whenever any BA is short. And so the cost of it doesn't reveal where the problem is within the system. And it's also socializing the cost of the scarcity across the market footprint. And since that cost would be socialized, our fear would be that it would create sort of free rider incentives to underprocure and lean on others' headroom, because if one BA is short and other BAs are long, the BA that's short doesn't pay the full price, the scarcity price of being short, but is essentially, passing those costs along to others, and is doing so in a way that on a footprint level would not even identify which BA is short in the first place. So, and again, the third point being the uniform price would impede the market from sending the megawatts where where in the footprint is actually tight, and so has, in our mind, less of a reliability benefit from that reason. It can still, a footprint level scarcity pricing can still attract supply outside the EDAM footprint to come into the EDAM footprint to the extent that that's useful. But, over time, as the EDAM and then grows and the, WIM footprint, that seems to become less useful over time as more, sort of more megawatts participating in the market. It seems better potentially to have those, the market be able to distinguish where within the market footprint the scarce regions are. So again, that's just a high level look at it, and we're not married to these opinions, but just wanted to provide some first look thoughts to stimulate some discussion. So we'll pause here for questions or feedback on slides 23 and 24.
Let's go ahead and unmute Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Can you repeat
Great.
yourself? Sorry.
Yes, no, that's fine. This is Callie Wells with WPTF. First of all, James, really appreciate you laying these questions out here. I think there's some great policy questions that we have to think through. So I was just going to offer up my initial reaction on this policy question. I think nodal scarcity pricing, I don't know necessarily if calling it more accurate. I guess I don't necessarily think it's about accuracy if we're talking nodal scarcity pricing. Even nodal scarcity pricing, I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around, because really what we're trying to get at is at a larger system footprint BA level, how much supply margin do we have left? And I feel like if you start talking nodal pricing, you're talking about how much supply do we have left at the specific location, and you're going to kind of lose out on a lot of the benefits that scarcity pricing, this robust scarcity pricing mechanism, is intended to provide. So yes, I agree. If you go down that path, it definitely would be the most complex from an implementation perspective. But I think at a higher level, I think talking about nodal scarcity pricing kind of gets away from the whole concept and benefit of, I think, what we're trying to get at here. So that was just kind of my initial reaction, and I think that's why that supply margin idea, I think that's one of the nice things about it, is you're not actually procuring any product. So because you're not procuring a product, there really isn't this need to talk about deliverability of that product. And then with that, this idea of nodal scarcity pricing kind of goes away in my mind. That was at least my initial reaction. I think definitely sticking with, a BAA or footprint level scarcity pricing is probably the best path forward. So I just thought I'd share that and see if you had any reaction to that.
Okay, great. Thanks for the feedback. I will have one reaction to that, but it's going to be on my next slide. So when that bullet comes up, I'll get there, and then you can jump in and we can discuss it further.
Yeah, no, of course. And yeah, and like I said, my reaction is from the supply margin design. It's kind of the nice thing, right? We're not procuring a new product, so we don't have to see if it's deliverable. Now, I do think, and I think at the last meeting you asked this question, is when we're calculating the available supply before we create that margin, do we need to look at, what is actually, like, is there a sense of deliverability from what's actually we include in that initial supply stack to begin with? But I don't think it was ever, is this nodally deliverable to a specific location? But yeah, I'll wait to hear your reaction on the next slide then.
Great.
We do have Dawn from CISA. Go ahead, unmute Dawn.
California Energy Storage Lines. Thanks for the presentation. I do agree that nodal scarcity pricing is sort of odd. The way I would think about it is when you have your supply margin or your latent reserves, you just want to make sure that you're only counting stuff towards that requirement that's, can be accessed by the market because it's not behind, because it's, it'd be inaccessible if it was, for instance, behind a constraint, binding constraint. One question I have on the footprint level, is that even implementable with multiple power balance constraints that we're having in the EDAM? It seems to me that that's what sort of pushes that one away, although it might be the, optimally what you would want to potentially get to. And then with regards to doing the balancing authority area level scarcity pricing, would we consider, for instance, eliminating the assistance energy transfers if you went down this approach? Because then there would be a premium for those BAs that are scarce. And would doing BAA level scarcity, in essence, put that available energy transfer design appropriately in the market versus out of the market like it is today?
Yeah, all three are great comments. We'll go one. Actually, I'm going to go in reverse order because your first question was sort of a continuation of Callie's comment that I'll go on the next slide. But as far as AET, I mean, that's been on the back of my mind, and I'm not sure. I think we need to talk about it. I mean, off the very top of my head, I can see some redundancy there, but I don't have the answers now, and I think people should start thinking about that. So thanks for bringing that up. And also on your second question about how footprint-wide scarcity pricing could apply, given that EDAM implementation's changing the modeling of even WIM, where we have separate calculated MECs and different power balance constraints for others. You might be right that may be an impediment to doing that right. I hadn't thought about that technicality yet, but certainly something worth investigating. But yeah, that does seem like a potential barrier there.
Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Thanks for your feedback. So what I sort of heard from Callie and Dawn is something we agree with in principle, that we think it sounds like there's some agreement that, the most, I hate to use the word accurate here, but the most accurate way of measuring sort of the available supply margin to the market would take into some consideration the deliverability of the margin itself. And so we're sort of dreaming up ways about how you would go about actually calculating that. Of course, deployment scenarios are one method that the ISO uses in its market models to do such a thing for flexible ramping product. There may be others that are good, but I think that in principle, we agree that having sort of assessing the available margin for some semblance of deliverability is important to making sure that the margin represents what's actually available to the market at any given time. And we don't want to be, in a sense, if we're sort of not accounting for deliverability at all, we don't want to be providing both the market and the operator sort of a false sense of comfort that, for example, let's imagine a world where you have sort of let's say 5,000 megawatts of additional supply bids that are accessible within a 1 hour time frame. But if only 1,000 of the 5,000 megawatts are sort of generally deliverable to load across the system, then you have a completely different picture about what the reliability condition at that time is. And so the question then becomes, well, what's the best way, given the trade-off between complexity and other things, what's the best way to assess what counts as sort of quote unquote deliverable headroom? And so that's kind of what my reaction was. And you could do that with deployment scenarios. And I'll just point out that you could also sort of massage the deployment area technique to work for the energy supply margin approach as well, because you could sort of create a scenario where all of the essentially where all of the sort of upward headroom is sort of deployed in a sense, and have the market, you know, towards load sort of broadly across the market footprint, and sort of have the market calculate or determine, you know, what quantity of that can be actually met on a demand curve. So I'm not saying that perfect, because the technicalities are just really high level. But in any sense, my point is I'm trying to make is that if you wanted to get down to something like a deployment scenario for an energy supply margin approach, you could do that. And it would result in nodal prices. I'm not sure what other, like, you could have a zonal approach where you have where you develop certain these procurement zones that have you know, targets and transfers between zones within BAs. But yeah, we'd be curious for some feedback about how you might actually accomplish an assessment of deliverability, or what's deliverable given the tools that are available to us. So not something you need to think about or to answer right now, but we'll be asking that sort of question in the comments and giving people some time to think about it, and we're interested in your ideas. Yeah, so the second bullet, again, we have an existing market method that could be applied to a reserve product of a deployment scenario that measures deliverability and gives nodal prices. And that method could be extended into an energy supply margin approach. Let's pause there and see if there's any questions or feedback.
Yes, we do have John. John, you're next. Can you please unmute, John, and then introduce yourself?
Okay, I think we are live here. James, I this is Jonathan Rumble from Southern California Edison, and I'm having a little bit of a difficult time with this conversation. And it's not necessarily about the technical aspects. I feel as though we are forging ahead with an effort that a large number of folks just aren't on board with at this time. And it is in you know, we're being put in this position of having to respond to some very technical things when we just don't think this is the time to have a conversation about nodal or BAA or footprint wide you know, new products or supply margin when really we really need to be focused on how DAME and EDAM is successfully implemented. And it's coming across slightly as fait accompli, and that with questions. So I don't think it's an accurate statement to say, well, it sounds like participants are leaning any one way or the other, because there were two people who have been very vocal in support of moving as quickly forward with scarcity pricing. And there's a whole bunch of people who have been on the opposite. So I can't even say that in from a technical perspective, you're getting an appropriate response from a large part of your stakeholder community, because we're just not prepared to have this conversation right now, and it's very difficult for us to sort of assess how we need to be responding here, because frankly we're very focused on making sure the market's going to be working May 1st, 2026. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's a tricky comment to respond to. Again, I acknowledge that the feedback to the ISO about its decision in the August draft proposal to defer comprehensive scarcity pricing was mixed, with voices on each side. This working group is going to be considering a comprehensive scarcity pricing design and starting with these highest level questions and getting the conversation going, getting feedback from stakeholders. That feedback can be positive or negative. It can be, we like this thing, we want you to talk about that more, we have these ideas, or we don't like that thing, we don't want you to talk about that more, we don't like these ideas. And at each step, the ISO will sort of reevaluate the way the trajectory is going. We are hoping to achieve, I'm not going to say a consensus, but we're hoping to achieve some momentum in a scarcity pricing design, and we hope stakeholders will engage with us and provide their perspectives, and whether be it positive or negative. And so I would say that if you're, insofar as you're feeling sort of trampled on, I would say that your voice still matters in this process. And we're going to be submitting or requesting comments at each stage. And if those comments are not positive, that's something that we take very seriously. So, but in the meantime, the objective of these working group discussions is to think about these topics in sort of a trickle down way, where if there's momentum that we can build towards a comprehensive design, we'll ride the train, and if not, then we'll have to reevaluate that. So I think that's the best that I can offer in response. I hope that helps.
Can we go ahead and unmute John just in case he had a follow-up? And then we'll go to Chris.
And I hear what you're saying, James, but you have to understand that this is a very sort of, potentially resource intensive working group. And so by virtue of you having it, and by virtue of there being a number of questions being asked, you are asking a bunch of stakeholders to redeploy resources so that instead of focusing on the real issue at hand, which is DAME EDAM implementation, we now have to come over here and focus our efforts in working on something that is of a lower priority than making sure DAME EDAM works. And that is the trade-off that, when Steve gave his presentation last week and we wrote the letter a couple of weeks ago, we're trying to get across here is that, yeah, these are important questions, and we want to be able to devote actual, resources to being able to, robustly respond here. And it's very difficult when you're frankly right in the middle, November, market simulation of DAME EDAM, and there's a lot going on there. And so I recognize that you're just trying to forge, some early answers to some questions, but that's actually taking away a lot of our resources from where we think it really needs to be devoted. So I'll stop it there, but we really, this needs to be addressed.
Thanks, John.
Next we have Chris.
Yeah, can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, this is Chris Devin with Calpine. I did want to opine on the options a little bit here and the deliverability point. And then I just thought I would respond a little bit to some of the SCE comments. But, first off, I think it seems like option 2 is a reasonable approach. And I think Callie and Don both mentioned some of the other shortcomings of the other options. And you've laid it out pretty well, James. So thanks for the overview on these different options. I think on the deliverability side, when you get into this nodal aspect, it seems to me that the LNP and congestion pricing already reflects constraints pretty well. So, setting aside the, some of the efficiency points that you make here, if you just think about the deliverability from an RA planning perspective, most of the supply that's needed to meet peak needs in the California BA is all studied for deliverability. So I think, there may be certain situations with outages or, transmission constraints, contingencies that may, shift some of that flow around. But overall, I think the BAA level path here is probably what we would prefer. And then just on some of this discussion, I think, harkening back to the original discussion that we had on this stuff in like the 2020 timeframe, when it was, originally being discussed as system level market power mitigation, I think there was a big push for, scarcity pricing to be considered, in parallel with that. And CAISO sort of committed to at least discussing both those things. And so since the CAISO has moved forward on this BAA level market power mitigation proposal into a draft final proposal stage, it really, in our view, is only appropriate to continue these discussions on the scarcity pricing as well. So I think SCE's points are fair about, wanting to focus on DAME and EDAM, but I guess I would put the question to CAISO as far as like the timeframes for some of this. It seems like we're in the midst of these discussions, and then there's plenty of time to implement this once we, come to some kind of an agreement or a, more robust final proposal, and we're really in the working group stages at this point. So it seems appropriate to us to continue these discussions. James, do you have any idea of when you might implement anything on either of these?
It's hard to say because, the design is still pretty theoretical. I think that the policy that is in the existing straw proposal, being sort of farther along and potentially less impactful to the systems overall, could probably be implemented. This is not a promise. This is just off the top of my head, but could probably be implemented targeting 1 year after EDAM go live. And I would expect it unlikely that what results from this comprehensive scarcity pricing design would be on that same track, given two things. One is that, of course, the policy development will take time. This is very complicated. There are a lot of questions to think through. It's going to take some time. But two, I foresee potentially that the impact to market and systems might be quite high relative to the changes in the existing straw proposal. Again, that is just my assessment. I'm not the professional at these sorts of things, but it's just the way I'm seeing it right now. And so from that perspective, it could be that you would be looking at any comprehensive scarcity pricing design being sort of, further down the road after EDAM and DAME launch. So I hope that's at least somewhat helpful to give you some intuition on where we are there.
Yeah, it is, James. Thanks for that. And, I appreciate the caveats there. I would just say that looking at the last set of comments, it seemed like there was definitely a lot of support for us to continue this more robust scarcity pricing discussion. So I do kind of object to the characterization that only a couple of people have supported CAISO in doing that. And I think there's pretty good support here for these discussions to continue, and there's plenty of time to implement this, once we get to a more robust proposal. And, I just want to give CAISO our thanks and support for, shifting the approach here back to a little bit closer to what it had committed to back, when this started years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
We do have Callie back. Just letting you know, James, there's 3 other folks with questions. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Since there's a few people behind me in queue, I won't take long. Just kind of echo a lot of Chris's comments there. I think in reaction to the previous commenter around, spending time on this design now. In a way, I share the frustration that we're still talking about this, because this was a priority that stakeholders in CAISO committed to doing back in, following the 2020 events. And so the fact that it's not implemented already, is this personally, I think, this should have been done a while ago. And, again, just echoing Chris's comments about, the need for scarcity pricing, especially given the direction the CAISO is headed on BA level market power mitigation and applying it to the CAISO. That seems to be moving forward, and these are intrinsically linked. And when the CAISO committed to doing the scarcity pricing, it was with the understanding that they would not move forward with BA level market power mitigation, especially on the CAISO BAA, unless a robust scarcity pricing mechanism like the one we're talking about today, they go hand in hand. And also just for everyone's awareness, when we did present last meeting on this idea, and so when we present on behalf of WPTF, we do represent over 75 companies, and while not all of our companies agree this is a high priority right now, the majority of them do think it absolutely should be a CAISO priority, especially again given the direction of the BA level market power mitigation that's being discussed as well. So just wanted to kind of share that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Todd is next, followed by Blair. Bonnie Blair. Thank you.
Todd Ryan with Pacific Gas and Electric. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
I want to just echo and support John Rumble's comments from SCE. We do believe CAISO has fulfilled its obligation in terms of its commitment to discuss scarcity pricing, and that we did spend a long time coming to this point, getting to the point of the straw proposal. We had a feasible straw proposal that in my mind does improve the existing scarcity pricing that we already have within the CAISO balancing area, and should reduce the amount of over mitigation in many WEI balancing areas. So I think this is a very fair proposal. I don't think anyone is suggesting that we never return to this topic. We are just suggesting that the timing is really poor at the moment, given that we are introducing a whole new reserve product and extending the day-ahead market at the same right now. So until we understand and fully see the EDAM and the imbalanced reserve product in operation, we don't know how much more of an urgent issue this is. So I fully support John's comment that we should delay further comprehensive scarcity pricing for a while, maybe a year, and move forward with the straw proposal.
Thank you, Todd.
We have Bonnie next.
This is Bonnie Blair. I work with the Six Cities Group. I also want to note complete support for what John and Todd have said. Callie pointed to the magnitude of supply basically represented. I think it's very clear that this is that the divide here is supply interest versus load interests. The joint LSE group, I don't know the exact percentage of load, but a very, very, very high percentage of load in the CAISO is represented by the folks that sponsored the joint LSE presentation at the last meeting. We have a situation where there's a new reserve product. There's, I think, a lot of concern and growing concern on the part of load as to how much costs borne by load are going to increase when that new reserve product is implemented. To then talk about adding another layer of increased prices on top of that is very concerning. I also want to, but I won't say any more about that. We'll say more in our comments. I'm trying to wrap my head around this the notion of how deliverability should affect the approach to scarcity pricing. It makes sense to say that supply that isn't deliverable isn't really available. And so that kind of begs the question, well, how do you decide what the supply margin is? I mean, do you have to look at deliverability to even decide what the supply margin is? And you would also consider it in relation to what resources would be entitled to be paid a scarcity adder, for lack of a better term. If it's supply that isn't deliverable for whatever reason, seems to me that supply shouldn't receive the scarcity adder. And it also strikes me that at some point you get to the stage of if nothing is deliverable, if no supply is deliverable to meet the demand in an area, what's the benefit of scarcity pricing, or what's the rationale for scarcity pricing? If nothing is out there that is both uncommitted and deliverable, what's the justification for driving prices higher under those circumstances? So, huge can of worms. But maybe a can of worms that has to be confronted because of the importance of deliverability in all of those elements of the equation.
It's a great question. Stay off mute so you can respond to me if you have a follow-up. But let me offer it to you in sort of let me offer it to you in this way. The simplest way that we could calculate a margin at any given time would be to just look at a bid stack. And you might say, okay, a simplified example. Let's say we've got 50,000 megawatts of bids available in a given interval, and 40,000 megawatts of demand, and demand being over the entire portfolio of products the market procures. So you might simply say, oh, well, yeah, right now we have 10,000 megawatts of margin, and your scarcity pricing could sort of apply that way, where as the margin decreases, you're in more of a reliability risk. Well, we presented on the November 10th workshop that we find that way of doing it kind of silly for two reasons. One is that bids are time bound, and the energy behind those bids are time bound, in the sense that you might be getting a huge amount of capacity bid from a really slow unit, or a unit that's takes a long time, that isn't committed at this time and takes time to start up. And so by the time you would even try to take action of that unit to solving the demand, it's too late, right? And so we feel that there has to be sort of a time boundary applied to the scarcity pricing. So, so we take our 50,000 megawatts of bid and say, well, actually only 45,000 megawatts of that supply stack is sort of actionable within some time frame that we're looking at. Okay, so now that's a better picture of the margin now. Now, the second step is then, well, you're also assuming at this step that all of the 45,000 megawatts can be delivered to load, where it's needed, where things are scarce. And it's possible that also muddies the sort of quote unquote reliability picture that scarcity pricing is trying to give you at any given time, by saying, well, even if I were to dispatch all the 45,000 megawatts of these units that can respond in this time, the amount of actual load served might, let's say it's 44,000 megawatts. So then you don't want to be using a 45,000 megawatt margin. You want to be using a 44,000 megawatt margin. That's the more accurate picture of, your system reliability condition at any given time. So hopefully that sort of way of trickling it down makes sense to like why we think both time-bound and deliverable margin is the goal here. And when we're talking about deliverable and time-bound, we're trying to assess, where do we find ourselves in the trade-offs of too much time, too little time, or the deliverability assessments are too intense relative to what's needed, or not intense enough. Is that helpful?
I mean, I'm following the logic, but then when you get it, if you push it to the extreme situation, I mean, let's say that BAAX is its margin is narrow, but there's no transfer capability available. I mean, that the import capability has been maxed out. What good does it do to apply scarcity pricing in that BAA at that point?
Well, one view of it could be, yeah.
I mean, when you get to that point, aren't you in a market power situation?
Yeah, there does become a point, and it's relevant in the scarcity pricing discussions that have been happening across the country, that there is a recognition that there may be some point where applying the higher price doesn't get you the incremental change that you're hoping for, because you could wave any price signal in front of anybody and they're not able to respond to it. Then what's the point? Is your point? And I think that's
exactly
and so that's sort of a recognized that's something that we need to be considering. And so when we think about those things, you think about sort of these circuit breaker ideas. I don't know if you remember back in the earlier working groups where we talked about that, some markets have designed their scarcity pricing with circuit breakers behind them. Circuit breaker is a term to describe a market process whereby you might sort of cut off the scarcity pricing after it's been in effect for so many hours or affecting so many dollars. There's different ways of doing it. Under the assumption that, well, if this amount of time has gone by and no problem has been resolved, then what's the point of continuing to pay? But I would say that, like, in response to on a sort of a theoretical level, your response to your comment, if you are in load shedding conditions, you also don't want to be, you want to have the price signals reflecting what your loads would actually pay to consume 1 more megawatt of power, or have 1 more megawatt of power available to it, because it might not become available to you in that moment, but if the price signals persist, you may get, anybody that can scramble over some time frame to eventually help, over a long time frame will still be incentivized to send power your way. And on the flip side of that, it's possible that while there may not be, generators available because there's transfer limits and things like that, well, maybe there's incentives then for, load serving entities to be activating more flexible or curtailable loads in their areas, to manage the situations in that way without relying on the ISO to sort of force the load curtailment. And so a scarcity pricing may be a way to sort of put more weight behind, that type of response where the loads flexibly respond. And I know that's a complicated path to go down, but just in theory, that is one way that you could resolve your concern. In practice, I'm very aware of the limitation there, but You kind of
Well,
see what I'm getting at? Yeah.
no, yeah, well, and we may be heading in the same direction. We haven't talked much in this process about ways to create greater incentives or different approaches or alternative paths to incentivize demand response or creative new way. I mean, I think it was one of your slides that you presented last week that said that I might be not getting it quite accurate, but essentially the concept was, you know, scarcity pricing is a proxy for demand response. Well,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah, let's not. Why don't we stop focusing on the proxy, or at least in addition to focusing on the proxy, focus on the demand response, and we haven't been doing that. We've been just coming up with ways to let prices get higher. And
And yeah. Go
and
ahead.
in point
Sorry.
of fact, when things get really, really tight in the CAISO, there is demand response that you know kind of comes out of the woodwork. You know, without a particularized program. And that, you know, maybe there's a better approach to addressing the scarcity problem than just letting prices go through the roof. Maybe a better approach is to try to find ways to trigger demand response that we don't already have.
And that's back in the early 2010s when FERC was thinking about scarcity pricing. This is exactly the thing that they had in mind. And I don't think FERC's vision has come quite true as they hoped the 15 years that followed. But the idea really is that scarcity pricing was the mechanism to incentivize more flexible demand participation in real time. And so you think about, like, basically the way that you can think about it now is that the quantity demanded at some time exceeds the quantity supplied. The CAISO operator has to involuntarily to the consumer, I suppose, shed the load in some areas to keep the. But you might conceive of, opportunities for the consumers to do that themselves, and the scarcity pricing can be a way to incentivize potentially, well, at these prices, I may be more likely to participate in a DER aggregators program, or if I'm an industrial load, participate in some sort of industrial load curtailment because the price is right for me to do that. And so then you avoid the load shedding conditions because you have sort of more flexible curtailable loads that are sort of voluntarily curtailing when the prices are too high, rather than relying on the system operator to do that.
But you don't have demand bidding in the real-time market. Maybe that's what we ought to be looking at.
And I think, there's a comment made by
expanding opportunities for load to express their willingness. I mean, like I said, my understanding is that it's been pretty consistent that when things are really, really tight in the CAISO markets, when you're arming load, when you're on the brink of having to have rolling blackouts, your public communications have effectively encouraged, voluntary, kind of non-compensated demand response. Am I right?
Yeah, it was noted for the summer 2022 events that the emergency declarations did seem to help in avoiding a load shed condition. But again, I mean, like that from a market's perspective, that's not a good outcome. We don't want non-compensated response. we want people to be responding to price incentives and make the best behavior that's optimal, in response to the prices.
Well,
And
agreed, but they don't
yeah.
have if they don't have the ability to respond. In other words, if it's just a question of, it seems to me we're looking only at incentivizing more supply by paying supply
Mm-hmm.
more money, and that there isn't
Mm-hmm.
enough emphasis on opportunities for load to say, well, wait, I mean, I'd rather turn my thermostat up 5 degrees for the next couple of hours than
Mm-hmm.
get a bill that is outrageous. But we don't. But
Mm-hmm.
there's not that ability right now.
I can tell you from my perspective that I 100% agree with the way you framed it, and hope that, I think you're right that in general people sort of, when they think scarcity pricing, their mind shifts towards the generator, but it's a balance. It's a balanced equation, and we try to present it in a way where it's like the scarcity pricing incents response from both sides of the market, and anybody who is able to respond, whether it's one more generator coming online, or offering a little more supply in the market, or reducing an expensive export, or a flexible load that can curtail. Anybody will take anything. And so the idea here is that, well, the price signal is the momentum, or the catalyzer to having the market find who is the most willing to curtail, or either curtail load or curtail demand, I'll say it broadly, or increase supply at this price. And you'll find that's what you're hoping to find. And I'll agree with you too that I think that more flexible demand bidding is like the Market Surveillance Committee in their early 2010s opinion on scarcity pricing, right? That perfectly flexible demand bidding would obviate scarcity pricing, because you wouldn't need to have these demand curves or these things to stand in for consumers that don't want to participate at these prices. So, I'm not. It's not my expertise how that could work better, but I think that the theory of scarcity pricing supports that part of the market working better.
James, this is Danny.
Yeah.
The ISO thinks it needs to work better too. We have an active initiative, the DDEMI initiative, that is exploring these exact questions of how can we get more robust load participation to help on that side of the balancing equation.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Danny,
mm-hmm. Is that coordinated though with this? With what we're looking at doing here? I mean, there are those things.
Yeah. I mean, we're all part of the same
together.
Policy development team, and we are kind of trying to look at this. I hate to use the term, but holistically, and figure out how all of these pieces best work together and complement each other.
And then I think what the joint LSE message that we hope you've heard is you're talking to, I mean, there's going to be an imbalance reserve product. If it works like it's supposed to, scarcity shouldn't happen, right?
It would, yeah. I mean, it would at least address, within the bounds that the imbalance reserve is designed to. We're not attempting to procure 100% of the uncertainty. So there will be times where even with procurement of these products, there's still not enough.
And I guess, query whether a demand response at that time could address the problem rather than just, setting marginal prices or setting market clearing prices at an extraordinarily high level.
Mm-hmm.
And before we design something that's based on the market we know today, shouldn't we see how the market that we're putting into place on May 1st actually works?
I think that
on that note, Bonnie, that
Yeah, that's probably, I mean, there's
no,
no
no,
more
no.
to
It's
say
like
on the subject, I think.
it's a theme that we've heard loud and clear, and I think it should be obvious by now that the ISO is also very focused on EDAM, launching successfully in May of next year. But as James has tried to articulate, like this is a pretty easy talking point to get across of what is scarcity pricing, what do these ideas do at a high level. The details of this are going to be really, really complicated of how we would implement them. And the way the ISO is at least trying to think of this is at this stage in the working groups, are there kind of general ideas that stakeholders can come together and say, this is a potential path forward, wherein the ISO can kind of go back and start to think about how all this stuff would work and be able to bring forth some more detailed proposal to then solicit additional feedback on. I don't envision that we would be publishing a comprehensive scarcity pricing draft final proposal in Q1 of next year. We're just starting to do the legwork, which we think is going to be significant on how we can implement this post-EDAM go live.
I hear you, but we're putting the cart before the horse, but I'll drop the mic now.
Thanks, Bonnie, for the discussion. I hope that was helpful for not just you, but others listening. That was good.
Next, we do have Torsten, and then I think Doug is after that. Go ahead.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Torsten Keeper with BAMX. I want to preface this by saying that in a previous life, I spent time studying scarcity events. I want to suggest that the market already has scarcity pricing. It's established by the $1,000 or $2,000 administrative bid caps, which are soft bid caps. And I think that is important, but we don't need to talk about that right now. So what we're really talking about is changing the bid cap and changing the way that we get to the bid cap. But certain scarcity pricing elements already exist. So I think it's important to start there. And I think when you pay attention to the proceedings of the DEMI and the storage working groups, you see a lot of demand or any kind of, a lot of behind the meter resources, and I mean significant behind the meter resources that are willing to participate at the current price caps, but they just don't have a method to do that right now. And they're looking for a method, and they're looking to do that through those working groups. So stepping back for a second to the Hogan paper from 2013, it's an important point that if demand can't participate, it doesn't seem like raising prices through, this vol cap ORDC could get more demand to participate if there's no method for them to participate. And so I think that it's important to go back to some of the basic premises here of the scarcity pricing design and consider whether the issue is that there are not appropriate incentives as is laid out in that paper, or if the issue is that the incentives exist, but there is no avenue for demand side resources to really participate. I would also add that I think we should be really careful from a first principles economics perspective in pretending that there is a single value of lost load. The value of lost load changes depending on how long your outage is. It changes depending on your segment, if you're a residence or business, or whether your house was built in 1900 or 2000. It depends on all those things. So I think that we're risking some equity concerns here by kind of raising prices that everybody has to pay when it is pretty clear that there are people, there are segments, businesses, loads who are willing to participate at the current prices. And I am concerned that increasing prices in this manner, and the Hogan paper supports the suggestion that this would probably increase prices. I'm concerned that would harm vulnerable ratepayers who aren't really capable of responding to these price signals. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to respond to the value of lost load comment because I agree with it. Mostly I can't remember which working group of discussion it was, but if you reach out to me, I can help you find it. But there was some discussion in this working group about some of the pitfalls of measuring value of lost load, recognizing, of course, your concern being the top one, which is that the value of lost load is different for different categories of customers and is different among those customers at different times. So how do you go about picking a single number to represent all that? That being said, 100% agree. That being said, MISO in their recent filing in 2025, they undertook a study where they measured on a weighted average, sort of value of lost load estimates for their, customer class. And they got a number and they scaled that number down to something that was vetted through their stakeholder process. They filed it at FERC and FERC approved it. And so I want to be careful to say that just because it's difficult and in some sense, like a very pure perspective of the word, impossible to nail down a single number it is possible and has been done to, do the studies, find a number that people agree on, even if it's not exactly purely the theoretical, quote unquote, right number. And so the way I like to think of it is that when I describe value of lost load, I say that the scarcity price would be anchored to and scaled by a value of lost load, meaning that it's likely that the value of lost load numbers are so astronomically high, there's just no way that there would be, that would be something that we could introduce. For MISO, I think that they had numbers in the $30,000 range per megawatt hour, and they ended up with a $10,000 megawatt hour cap. So they reduced their value of lost load estimates by, over a third. And so, yeah, so I hope that's helpful context. Let me know if there's anything there you'd like to respond to.
Well, it suggests to me that it's an administrative price by another name, because when you just cut something in by a third off of what your research suggested, and I would say too that this whole concept of the value of lost load is very much still being discussed in the literature. It's something that's a very active, area of research at the national labs. It seems premature to me to try to settle on a value of lost load when even the scientists haven't figured it out yet. There's still questions about whether or not we should be considering the value of statistical life or things of that nature. So I'm concerned that this initiative is a little bit out of step with the demand and the storage initiatives, and that they are trying to address unlocking additional load side resources at the current prices. And it seems like they're available at the current prices. So I'm skeptical that the rationale really exists to try to raise prices in this way to unlock additional demand that seems like it's already willing to participate.
I appreciate the feedback.
Hey, James, just want to check on you. We do still have a lot of questions in the queue.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll take as many questions as we can get to, and if we need to, I think I only have one or two more slides anyway. So if we need to come back another time and do those slides, I'd rather hear from people what they think is interesting.
Awesome. We do have Doug next. Doug, go ahead when you're unmuted.
This is Doug Boccignone, also with Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. I was going to raise some of the points that both Bonnie and Torsten did, so I won't repeat them, but I will say that the important takeaway I have from that discussion is that, do we need this chicken and egg question? Do we need scarcity pricing in order to get enough price responsive demand participation in the market? Or are there some other things that are holding that up? some structural issues in terms of like how retail rates are set, that are the real stumbling block. And, you know, can we get those resolved if we don't have scarcity pricing? And I think I made this point on the previous call. It does seem to me that if we can't, until we have addressed the structural problems and have a mechanism for the price responsive load to participate in the market, we shouldn't have scarcity pricing. It seems like that creates the equity problems that Torsten was talking about. And then the other comment I wanted to make is I agree that in the previous discussion there was a linkage made, going back a year or two ago, between scarcity pricing and market power mitigation. That Callie mentioned it, but I had my recollection, which, you know, might not be accurate, but my recollection was a little different from Callie's, and it was that, and you shouldn't have scarcity pricing without appropriate market power mitigation. You know, rather than, you shouldn't have the extended footprint market power mitigation without scarcity pricing. So I don't know. Perhaps I'm misremembering, but my recollection is different from Callie's.
Yeah, and on the second point, I mean, our plan as of now is to combine these topics into a single decisional item, and like that likely means also implementation. So from our perspective, they're linked in, you know, it doesn't really matter which one caused which one you need first supporting the other one. Where our plan is to do them together. So hopefully that relieves some concern. On the first point, and I'll bring this up because the last caller mentioned this too, but you know, I want to be clear that the purpose of scarcity pricing is not singly focused on incentivizing more demand response. It is the purpose of scarcity pricing is to put into the market prices that reflect the reliability conditions to incentivize whatever response is necessary and cheapest, such that the ISO, the system operator, doesn't have to involuntarily shed load. So I wholeheartedly agree with the last three callers that the ISO should proceed. It would be beneficial to the market for the ISO to proceed on more demand side flexibility. I think that supports very well the goals of scarcity pricing. In my mind, it does not eliminate the need for scarcity pricing. And it also doesn't I'm not convinced that in absence of a higher ability for demand side participation, that scarcity pricing is unnecessary or not useful, because demand side participation is only one factor of many different responses the market could make in response to scarcity prices. And so, yeah, I'm happy to hear your reaction to that, but just sort of where my head's at.
I mean, I agree that we're trying to send the price signals both to supply resources and load. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if you don't have a mechanism that sends that price signal to load, that, you know, price responsive load, then you shouldn't, you know, because, you know, in the end, it's the load who's going to pay for this. So if you only have the supply side that can respond to the signals, and, you know, and remember, in a competitive market, the supply should be offering up at their marginal cost. And, you know, so it's like, well, you're talking about windfalls. if you've got a scarcity price that's significantly higher than that, and if there really isn't a means, I think Torsten made a really good point. Is it appears to be quite a significant amount of load that is interested in participating at the current, soft cap prices. And as Bonnie mentioned, there was in the real difficult events, there was many gigawatts of load with no compensation participate, which, that's not a good way. We definitely want to get this into the market, but, there we got a big response as if with no compensation. Now, maybe you could say, well, they're worried about blackouts, so maybe they were responding to that. But I just think, it's not sufficient to implement something like this without a way for the load to see and respond to and be compensated at those same price levels.
I think it's quite possible that if it's true that there is sort of this untapped potential of load flexibility wanting to participate under the existing caps, then that's fantastic, and it will reduce the likelihood that the scarcity pricing becomes relevant, and maybe it never does, and that would be a good thing. But at the end of the day, there has to be something in place that is signaling to market participants what the current reliability condition is at any given point. If insofar that the demand response under the current caps is insufficient, then what do you do? And so we do hope. I mean, the ultimate goal is we hope that this never happens. But when we are in tight system conditions, something is necessary to sort of arrange, where we're going to get incremental megawatts from or decremental megawatts from, either from load or supply, always as sort of this backstop. So it still feels to me that even if you have a lot higher load flexibility and demand participation, which is a wonderful thing, we'd welcome that. It doesn't seem to me to render something like this completely unnecessary.
But that's not what the MSC said in 2010. Right? They thought it might be unnecessary.
Well, I mean, that's under, fair point. I did make that comment. There, obviously, we're thinking of an idealized world where everybody's participating flexibly. I mean, there's always, I think, even if you have more flexible demand participation, there's still going to be significant parts of the load curve that are, inelastic, not responding to price.
Yeah, sure, there will be. But I think we're really only talking about the last part of the load curve, 5%, 10%, maybe 20%. And that's enough. The question is, are the current market prices and the current administrative prices enough? I don't think we've ever tested that, and I'm worried that it's really these other barriers, which was mostly a retail rate making problem. I think we should be focusing our resources on solving that problem. And if it's not sufficient, do something else. Because even if we had the stick of even higher prices, and if we haven't solved the first problem, that would be a really bad outcome in my view.
I appreciate the discussion. It's really interesting and something we can take back and think more about and continue discussing in this forum.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Just checking. The next person on queue, we have Michelle Keto.
So many questions. So my first one is, isn't the load bias in HASPs just juicing the demand curve?
Technically, no, because the load bias comes into the market as energy, which is protected at a certain penalty price that doesn't have it has basically one price to represent not serving the schedule and not sort of this graduated curve, so to speak.
But it does
where you're
increase
going to
the
curtail.
demand, right, above what we expect it to be. So it's
Correct. Yeah, it does do that.
okay. So then I just want to go back to the bootleg fire. So as you'll recall, the bootleg fire, we lost a transmission line, and the model thought that it could relax the transmission line, but it couldn't. So California ended up going into a stage 1 or stage 2 emergency. I think we even maybe dropped load. And the reason we did is because CAISO doesn't cut low priority exports post HASP. So if it goes into the next round of HASP, we cut the low priority exports. But do you think it's appropriate to be using scarcity pricing post HASP when CAISO could cut the low priority exports? I mean, in this case, we took the reliability hit, even though in order to support those low priority exports, right? So have you thought about that? Like, what's your thinking about that?
So Michelle, this is
It's
Danny, and I can help with this. The ISO does have a process for curtailing LPT exports post HASP. It is a manual process. It's not effectuated through the market, which is your point, but we do have a process to do that. And
But we
I
didn't
think
do
at
it.
times, LPTs have been cut post HASP
But they weren't
for reliability purposes.
okay, but they weren't cut after the bootleg. We took the hit and we dropped load. And under those circumstances, you would say we should have scarcity pricing. Does that seem right to you? To California customers?
I mean, keep in mind that the exports who are self-scheduling are going to pay the scarcity price they're buying out of the market too. And so insofar as the exports don't value the energy or don't want to assume the risk of paying the scarcity price that it could possibly hit, maybe they don't offer in the LPT after the scarcity pricing.
Yeah, okay, so let's go to another example. During the West-wide heat wave, we cut the LPT exports and they didn't agree to the cuts because both sides have to agree to the cuts. So in that circumstance, is it appropriate for California customers to bear the scarcity pricing when people aren't following instructions? I think we need to do some fixes before we impose scarcity pricing when people are not doing what they're supposed to do. This was a whole other initiative that you guys dropped.
I would offer, Michelle, that not having a more robust scarcity pricing due to concerns about market participants either not following tagging rules in a timely manner or suffering software challenges on their side, or for whatever reason the curtailments weren't agreed upon by both sides, that wouldn't to the ISO be a good reason to forgo having a good market design.
But Danny, the good market design is not to allow them to e-tag unless they've cleared, right? You guys forced it into the emergency conditions by approving the e-tag without them getting a feasible schedule. So you guys are creating it. You guys have a fix to this, and I sort of feel like we need to start with first principles, fix the problem of allowing this to move into the operational space when we have fewer options. So let's fix that first, because I don't think it's appropriate for California customers to be bearing the scarcity pricing when we have created the problem by allowing people to e-tag exports that haven't cleared.
So I think in the catalog that the California ISO just put out, this is actually planned to be addressed in the RSC3 initiative, which is listed in the catalog.
Yeah, but you guys, you get pushed back
and the roadmap.
So how about we do this one first, and then maybe we can deal with it, because all of the problems we've had with scarcity pricing had to do with exports, and we have to fix that problem before we can go here. And
well, that's
you guys have pushed it off for so long. We had a solution, and I don't know, whoever got you guys to reverse course.
I'm not suggesting that there isn't additional work that needs to be done there, Michelle. But what I am suggesting is that that work wouldn't preclude the ISO from having, what were the principles we originally identified, James? Kind of rational prices that rise regularly, predictably, and rise in concert with the diminished reliability situation.
I'm
I
saying
think
that
that's the goal. And
there's another fix to the reliability issue that is just right there, and you guys haven't done it. And I sort of feel like if you are concerned about reliability, this is the fix before you move to scarcity pricing. Don't you? I mean, do we really want to tell California customers, we're going to black you out and you're going to have to pay $10,000 because we're going to be exporting? I mean, also the Market Surveillance Committee identified the issues that we have with HASP, right? So could we go back to those as well? Because we have some fundamental issues with HASP. I mean, look, if people want to participate in the 15-minute market at the interties, great. But HASP locks them in, and that's a problem. So get rid of HASP, and then I might feel a little differently about this.
I think we're sympathetic to the need to improve the way HASP and LPT exports are or clear the HASP and then how those materialize through the T20 tagging deadline. Like I said, it's something that the ISO has identified as a item to work on in its upcoming policy roadmap. So to the extent that this should be prioritized, we'd ask that the PUC and any other stakeholders kind of echo that in the comments that they submit as part of this process, as well as an additional data point for the ISO and in the prioritization.
Okay, and then I will also say, I know you guys are sort of hip on value of lost load, but Texas did have $10,000 lost load, and we can see what happened there. And then, a bunch of people were fired and they reduced it to 5,000, and they don't have a capacity market. So we can go down that path, but it will end in tears for someone. So it seems like prudent to sort of think about what our aim is here. So thanks for taking my comments.
Thank you.
We do have Steve King from SCE Edison. Go ahead, Steve. You're unmuted.
And I want to follow up. The point I was going to bring up was the one Michelle did at the end is, we have a resource adequacy, which is designed to deal with these situations, because when you get into the shortage situation like that, the market doesn't work. That's why we have the administratively set caps. That's why we have resource adequacy. It's designed to ensure that most times we have sufficient energy so that the market functions and so that it limits market power. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to have RA, then you do what Texas did, where you have a market where you have really high prices. And as Michelle said, they had $10,000 prices. It didn't stop them from having outages. The fact that prices were up at $10,000 for several days did not suddenly get them a lot more power. It just meant that, customers paid an awful lot and there were a lot of issues afterwards. I don't think we want that here. The other thing is, like you talk about trying to get demand. I think there's also a timing issue. This is the problem. The market stops functioning at that point. Most demand doesn't see those instantaneous prices. So, so if I'm thinking about, well, if I reduce my demand, most demand isn't going to see the fact that it's $1,000 price at that point. They're going to see something less. And the more effective way to deal with that is out of market, because it's essentially when you're in that position, you're out of market. And that's why, like, the flex alerts and the emergency things actually did something, because that's what drives people at that point. People don't, a large part of the load doesn't see anything close to real-time prices. And the other thing is, because of the market, even when real-time prices go up, a lot of the bids in real time, bids have to be submitted, an hour ahead of time. So I don't know that, increasing the prices like that is really going to bring in more supply or reduce load that much. I think we need to think about that. And again, I think that's why, in California, we put in place an RA program that has a must offer requirement that should mean that in most situations we have sufficient generation, so we're not going to be in those situations. All right, and that's Yeah, I've said that that's enough for now.
Thanks, Steve.
We do have Alan next, followed by Michaela. Go ahead, Alan. Introduce yourself.
PG&E. I wanted to respond to something specific that James, you said a couple of conversations ago. You said that you're just trying to put out a proposal to see if you can get stakeholder consensus around a concept. And it seems to me that you're just putting the cart before the horse, because before you get to, can we find a solution that stakeholders agree on, first you have to identify a problem. And it seems to me that this is a solution in search of a problem, because as many people have paraded around already, we still have massive changes coming to this market, and it is far from clear whether or not scarcity pricing will even be needed. And so before we get to all of the sophistry, I think there needs to be a demonstration of need. I'm not seeing it yet. I don't think that we can see it yet. So you don't need to respond. We've beaten this horse to death, I think, but it's just, yeah.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate your providing your perspective.
Next, we have Michaela. Please be sure to introduce yourself. Go ahead, Michaela. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, can you hear me?
A little bit.
A little
Go
bit?
ahead.
Okay, I know I'm getting like signals that I don't have great connection. Michaela Fly, Customized Energy Solutions. There's a lot of conversation, and I could respond to so many things. I was laughing a little bit because I remember talking about scarcity pricing in 2020, and it was after the like $9,000 pricing events in Texas in 2019 that were deemed a big success because they didn't actually enter a load shed in that summer event. And so everybody was like, oh, look at Texas, it worked. And then just a few years later, Uri happened. And they were very different events, and these are very different systems. And so it's always hard to kind of point to scarcity pricing in other regions as a success or a failure. But I was wondering if it would be helpful to put together some examples, because I think seeing the settlements and the impacts would be helpful, because like some of the conversations before, if we're in load shed, then presumably load is buying back their position from the day ahead at the scarcity price in real time. So they could actually be getting paid, being compensated for the fact that they're being cut. And also just the fact that generally scarcity pricing is a real-time market event, and it's most of the load and generation settles in the day ahead, right? And so my guess is that the price impacts to customers of scarcity pricing, like it's being discussed, is actually probably a lot less impactful than potentially just the imbalance reserve project. Honestly, it's been cleared in the day ahead market, just because even at lower prices, being cleared every hour in the day ahead was probably just going to add up a lot more than a few scarcity pricing intervals a year in the real-time market. But that doesn't mean that it's not important, right? But I think that the context around the impacts of this sort of design might be helpful. I know it's really hard to sort of put together when you don't have an event. But if you're talking about exports during emergency events, I mean, that's something that's definitely a reason to have better scarcity pricing, because obviously you don't have the signal in place that the power is valuable where you are, that people are presumably shipping it to higher value places. And so I think examples that show the flow of revenues could be helpful.
I think that's a fair point. And I actually want to respond to part of your question. If I could just cover slide 26 in 1 minute and then promise time for the last two callers, that might be helpful, because this slide sort of touches on your comments about the day ahead market. And I agree with your characterization that I feel like scarcity pricing is more of a real-time phenomena. That being said, there may be benefits from including whatever gets designed in this process into the day ahead market. For a few reasons, you may have better unit commitment. You have the ability to start long start units that you lose the ability to start in the real-time market if high scarcity is being anticipated. Storage schedules are going to be more accurate. Your interchange is going to reflect the scarcity better. And so all else equal, we think that there may be benefits to doing that. Obviously, consistent price formation being another one where you have similar, to the extent possible, it is an objective to try to have some similar market models between day ahead and real time so that, participants in the ISM can, participate financially in the way that they need to and hedge the way that they need to. And that's all helpful. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with ongoing EDM and DAME. That seems scary to be thinking about right now, and I agree with many on that. Also want to point out that in the MISO filing, they did change the rules to allow for all load bids, including virtual demand, to be able to bid higher than the supply bid cap, so as to be able to potentially hedge real-time prices to higher than the bid cap will go, recognizing if scarcity pricing puts you higher than the supply bid cap, loads may want to have ability to hedge at those higher levels, and that's something that FERC did approve. So I hope that's helpful context there for you and for others. And then for the other parts of your question, I think we can consider thinking about maybe doing some case studies where we look at, implementations of scarcity pricing others. It's in pretty much every market in FERC. So it's not something new. ERCOT's had some challenges. We can look at some of that there. That might be useful. I also sort of agree that the real-time settlement is often misleading. One of the things that gets understated a lot of times is that scarcity pricing also penalizes generators with day-ahead schedules that aren't available in real time, who have to buy back schedules, or really any supplier who, becomes unavailable is also paying back the scarcity price. And so, the costs are going to be borne by, those that are sort of driving the need, so to speak. And a settlement example may be helpful in sort of elaborating on that a bit, acknowledging that, of course, any example is going to be stylized and simplified, and we'd have to weigh in whether that it provides more information than it confuses, but I think it's something we can think about.
I think Michaela, let's go ahead and mute her just in case you had any.
Yeah, I know we're at time. I have one quick question on this slide, though. Thanks, James. Is the proposal to extend the imbalance reserves to real time on the table in this conversation?
Well, I'll give you a little flavor. So in the conversation about a potentially extended, what we can call it extended FRP or extended whatever product, some new reserve product in real time, you could potentially foresee that product being more synonymous with the imbalance reserve and perhaps even settling off the imbalance reserve product. And so, yeah, I think that there's a potential. I wouldn't say extending imbalance reserve to real time is not the way I would phrase it. I would say it more like there may be a real time market product that's more similar to imbalance reserve in the day ahead than the FRP is. Maybe that's not a long enough scarcity, look ahead. but it's something that we're obviously going to need to talk about if that's the design that we'll ultimately pursue for a reserve product.
We do have two more hands. I know we're at the top of the hour. James, would you like to go ahead and, I know we have Callie Wells and Todd Ryan.
Yeah, let's
If they
take
could
the
be
two hands and then we'll, yeah, close it there.
awesome. Awesome. Todd goes first. Please be brief if you can. Thank you.
Hi, you unmuted Todd Ryan from PG&E. Did you mean to go to Callie first?
No, you're first online. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. I didn't want to cut the queue. Hey, Todd Ryan from PG&E. I think I'm hearing a lot of frustration from stakeholders that it feels like we're wasting time. It feels like we've spent literally 5 years talking about this and we're moving backwards. And it's frustrating that we're going to have to spend another 2 hours finishing the same conversation in moving in the wrong direction. So I want to stress that this is about resourcing and or primarily about resourcing for PG&E, and that removing or moving forward with the scarcity improvements that were already outlined in the straw proposal just makes sense. It feels like all the work that went into that is being wasted uh, in this moving back a year in the process. I understand other people may view it differently, and other people may view that they've been waiting a long time for these improvements or further more comprehensive improvements to happen. And I'm I share their frustration, but this is let's not continue this conversation and go in circles. Let's move forward with the straw proposal, and we can continue this conversation on comprehensive just a little further in the future. DDEMI might unlock a lot of potential load supply. There is the impending EDAM and DAME launch that we've mentioned previously. I think Michelle raises a great point about looking into HASP and low priority exports and their interactions with scarcity pricing. So it's a timing thing, and the more CAISO reverses course and continues to have these conversations go backwards, the more frustrated stakeholders will get.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate your feedback. I want to quickly respond to one point, which is that we are planning in this process to continue making improvements and updates to the existing straw proposal. We're actually working on that now, and it is our intention to continue to move forward with the August straw proposal, and I'm hoping to release the next iteration of that proposal soon. Maybe not soon, but relatively soon. And then, so we're not planning to use this, remembering back to that diagram from the previous meeting, that we are trying to sort of make incremental progress on both of these things at the same time, so not to leave one behind. So,
but didn't you say that you were going to hold the filing and move them together? I mean, a comprehensive plan to do scarcity pricing or this energy margin plan could take 2 years to go through a full stakeholder process for us to iron out all the details and then get to the point of bringing it to a board. So are we going to sit on the straw proposal for 2 years?
Yeah, I understand better what your comment is then. Okay. So the current plan is to take the culmination of both of these efforts for a governing decision at the same time. However, that's, these plans get reassessed constantly. And insofar as it's looking like that's no longer reasonable to us, then we would not, I don't think that we would, for example, in my mind, I don't think that we would, if we felt like the stakeholder process for this track of the initiative was going to take that long, I don't think that we would wait. If it's waiting a few months, I think maybe we would do that. So it just kind of depends.
And
So yeah.
James, I think this would be something that we would look to ask for specific comments on from stakeholders, and if stakeholders could kind of feel what or say what they feel are the pros and cons of waiting or not waiting, that would help the ISO in kind of understanding where the stakeholders collectively are at.
Danny, have we not been clear in our previous round of comments?
The previous round of comments, I think, were clear in not our biggest takeaway, I guess, was why the joint LSCs wanted to defer the discussion on a comprehensive scarcity pricing. You are right that this was an element there, and you were clear, but that there are a lot of other stakeholders who are advocating for the other side and who would want these to be packaged, and just kind of seeing what their rationale would be as contrasting to kind of your rationale, which seems to be more based on resource constraints, would be helpful in helping the ISO understand where everybody's at.
Understood. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Todd.
We have Kelly Wells. Go ahead, Kelly, from WPTF.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I know we're already almost 10 minutes past, so I will try and keep this brief. But James, I don't see these conversations as moving backwards. This is actually the first time that we've really been able to talk through this concept of a supply margin, which is something we've been, mentioning from the beginning is what we see as the most implementable design. So I don't see these conversations as going backwards, and I really hope we can continue having them. But I kind of wanted to bring this whole conversation up to a little bit of higher level. There was a lot of conversations and comments made that I could respond to, but I just want to, I think we're missing kind of the bigger picture here. And I really do think and believe we all agree that we want our market to have prices that accurately represent the system conditions at that time. And there's a question about we need to show that there's a need, that there's an issue with that. Well, 2020 and 2022 highlighted that issue. We were on the brink of shutting load. We were in emergency conditions, and the prices were $100. And yes, I would love to see more price responsive demand in the market, but if we don't fix this issue and we're still seeing $100 prices when we're on the brink of shutting load, those demand response resources aren't going to be triggered. So if we actually want to enact those resources, we have to fix this pricing flaw that we know exists. And then if we're looking at the mitigation proposal that's coming, alongside here, that's actually going to make it worse because now we're in those tight supply conditions. We're mitigating more, and that's going to drop prices even lower. And if we don't have a mechanism in the market to make sure those prices continue to reflect the accurate system conditions, we are going to continue to make this pricing flaw worse as we move forward. So there is a need, there's a demonstrated need. It's happened a couple times, and I think it's just going to get worse if we don't fix this sooner rather than later. And the last point I want to make is with regards to the RA, yes, we have an RA construct. It plans to reliability standard. Right now, it's less than a 1 in 10. And scarcity pricing isn't intended to just simply have higher prices. It's intended to send those signals when our planning standards, when we are in those extreme events and our planning standards isn't enough, right? We're not planning to 100% all the time. It's a reliability standard. And then scarcity pricing comes in after that to try and get as much additional supply as possible so we can avoid those load shed events that I think we all want to avoid at the end of the day. I will leave it at that. I really appreciate the CAISO continuing to have these conversations. I know it's, there's a couple sides to whether or not we should have a robust scarcity pricing in place, but I think there's been a clear demonstrated need, and it's just going to get worse if we don't fix it sooner rather than later. So I will leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. We do have one more hand. Tristan, if you can be brief, that'll be great. And then I think we're not going to be able to take more.
Yeah, I will be really brief. Thank you. This is Tristan Keeper with BAMX. I recently reviewed the root cause analysis for the 2020 extreme weather event, and I may have missed it, but I didn't see prices called out as in one of the three primary root causes there. So I think that to echo many other commenters, there's a lot of value in grounding this in this question. Would these proposed market designs have actually prevented an issue like 2020 or 2022? So I think that's something we should consider in the context of that root cause analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten. I don't see any other questions. I know, James, we're out of time. Any last remarks before we wrap up for our stakeholders?
No, I just think the discussion today was fantastic and appreciate everyone's feedback. I only had one more slide, which was just a review slide, so feel free to take a look at it on your own. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then Brenda and I will be working together to for a comments template for formal comments to come in so that we can, hear how you're feeling and what's interesting to you in this discussion so that we can focus our next working group discussion on the things that are relevant to folks. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Thanks for our stakeholders for staying with us today. We do have a few updates. As James mentioned, we do have that December 4th deadline of that price formation commenting template. We'll have that available pretty soon. And also we have a lot of material posted on the website. So you'll see an inventory list of all the meetings and also presentations from the past few years. And then if there's any questions, feel free to send me an email to bmarquez@kaiso.com or ISO stakeholder affairs at kaiso.com as well. And then the last slide I just have to present, we do have Energy Blog Matters that we post regularly. The last one we posted a few weeks ago for Energy Vampires. I also have an update. We did post a notice on the Market Performance and Planning Forum. The one that's coming up in December has been rescheduled to January. In the notice, you'll see the updates to why we updated those, but it will currently will be matching the timelines with our current analysis. So you'll see the best times that our team will be able to provide on those market performance planning forum meetings. So in January, you'll see that upcoming one. But if you have any questions before that or why, you feel free to see that notice. We just sent it out yesterday afternoon. And that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for everyone. We look forward to you in this recording. Will be posted within the next few business days, so you'll see that as well. Thanks so much.
That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.